Hi, I'm Kara, life coach, wife, and mom to 4 incredible and unique children. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and confidence that once felt so lacking. I created the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves feeling trapped and with no one who really understands. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle your ability to dream. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you are a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Hello, and welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast. Do you ever meet people and just think, they are really incredible? This is how I feel about Erin, who is our guest today, Erin Trier. Specifically, she has a way of being that is very driven, very intentional, yet also authentic and vulnerable. So it's a really kind of a cool pairing. And I think you'll get to experience that as she and I explore her story and actually a little bit of her expertise in this episode. Let me tell you a little bit about who she is as a human. So Erin lives in Park City, Utah with her husband, Dave. They have been married for 16 years and have 4 children. So I like her already because we're kind of similar. Amelia, 13, Brendan, 11, Jillian, 7, and Rowan, 5. She studied social work and psychology and worked in corporate human resources and has been a health coach for the past decade. Now, as we get into this episode, I want to highlight a resource that I didn't mention in the episode, but we talk about some of the very hard actual thoughts and feelings that we have as special needs moms. And to bring up a message that I got from a fellow mom over on Instagram. And there's a podcast episode, like I said, I didn't mention it during the conversation with Erin, but I want to make sure you have it as a resource if this part of the conversation really resonates with you. And the episode that I created is called Impermissible Thoughts. We'll have the link to that actual episode in the show notes, but I mean, as the name suggests, this idea is sometimes we have these thoughts that maybe we feel like if anyone knew what we were thinking, game over. Yet you're having these thoughts. So in the episode on impermissible thoughts, we talk about it. And I hope my goal is that you actually walk away thinking, nothing's wrong with me. I'm not a terrible mom. Actually, I'm a wonderful human that is deserved of support and love and help. So go ahead and check that out if you resonate with that part of the conversation. And the other thing I want to mention before we get into the interview is that I just finished. Actually, I'm still making a few finishing touches, but I just finished creating a new, and I'm going to say pretty cool resource for you called the Special Needs Mom Survival Pack. So this is a resource that is kind of a 2-part. The first part is a PDF, a printable and beautiful resource that includes several different survival aspects. Actually, I look at specific support that's approachable, accessible, all the things for you, where you're at now. I have that, but I also have a private podcast that I recorded. So the two work together, and the private podcast is really bringing the survival pack to life and hopefully making it so that these resources go from a cool idea to something that you're actually using to support yourself. So that was my intention as I created this. And so go ahead, and what you'll do is just give me your email. I'll send them right over to you. Then you'll get to be also in the email sphere and get updates on all the different things that we got going on. You'll be the first to know. yeah, I had a lot of fun thinking about how to make this effective and actually being helpful. So let me know how it goes. And with that, let's welcome Erin to the show. Erin, welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Kara. I am so grateful to connect with you, my friend.
Yes. Before we started recording, I was telling her how about when we first connected, I was just getting sick. And I think I was entering the delirium and I was like, I cannot remember what we talked about, but I do remember it was really deeply connecting. And I just really was excited about this next conversation.
Yes.
So if you're like, I already told you this and it sounds new to me, now you know why. But let's start with giving our listeners, let's do a snapshot. Like, so in your life today, where do you live? What's your family look like? How do you spend your days?
Such a great question because I feel like my days are different in a lot of different ways. I'm married to my husband, Dave. We live in Park City, Utah. We've been out here about 8 years. We both grew up in the Midwest. So I was in Chicago my whole life, but we moved out here for his job and we've been out here 8 years and it's been such a blessing for our family. We have 4 kiddos, 13, 11, 7, and 5. And I'm an entrepreneur. I work in the wellness space. So my days are kind of sporadic and all over the place. So a lot of the time is spent on continuing to build my business and figuring out ways to just serve in the wellness space in different ways that I feel called to do so. But it's also balancing motherhood and balancing appointments and, trying to keep our house in order and all the things. So I feel like every single day is different. And that's probably one of the biggest things I've had to embrace as a busy mom and entrepreneur is that life is messy and busy and different every single day. And that's just kind of the reality and that's okay. So that's a little snapshot about me.
That's awesome. Do you like having it different every day? I love having it. I always tell people, I was like, I would starve. I wouldn't starve. But if I had to do like a job where I like checked in and checked out at the same time, I was like, that would be real hard for my brain to do.
Yeah, it'd be really hard for my brain to do. I worked in corporate HR right out of college. Mm-hmm. And, I enjoyed that time and learned so much, but for where I am now in my life, for our family's needs, for what I'm craving to do as far as impact goes, that would be really hard for me too. So yes, I do like variety and having days feel different. Some days super busy, some days not as much. Being able to kind of dictate my schedule a little bit more and having that freedom has been really profound, especially for our family and kind of balancing what my kiddos need too. So yeah, I'm with you. It would be very hard for my brain.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive in a little bit more to your special needs child. And I'd love if you would just give, as much as you feel comfortable sharing here, a little snapshot of what his health journey has looked like.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey for us. And I think the hardest part for our family for a long time is everything was kind of inconclusive. And so Brendan is our 11-year-old son. And in the early stages of his life, we started to see like little things pop up. His eyes were misaligned once he started to sit up. And then right before his 2nd birthday, he had his first round of little seizures. And then we went into the hospital. We did all the testing, had a lot of evaluations done, a lot of scans done, and everything again was kind of inconclusive. Like they didn't really know why he had this round of seizures. They kind of came and then they left. And there wasn't any definitive information on why. And so the neurologist at the time had said, maybe this was just a round of toddler-focused seizures and he's going to grow out of them. And, that's that. And so that was actually right before we moved to where we are now. So that happened right before his 2nd birthday. Before he turned 3, we made our move out to Utah. And from 2 years old to 8 years old, we saw nothing related to physical symptoms, right? Or physical changes in his body other than just like typical development. But we did start to see some more on the behavioral side, right? Some emotional regulation differences, some behavior differences and things like that. So we went through a lot of different interventions, went to early intervention, some mental health therapists and things like that, occupational therapy to kind of help him feel supported and where he needed behaviorally. And then on the morning of his 8th birthday, he had a seizure as he was getting up out of bed, fell out of bed, turned blue, stopped breathing. We called EMS. It was really traumatic for us because we had seen nothing for 6 years.
Yeah.
And, that morning is so like etched in my mind because it was just this vivid thing that just flipped the script for our family very quickly. And so, we took him straight to the ER that morning. We kind of talked through his history. And that kind of led us down this exploratory road of what was maybe happening underneath the surface. Because in addition to seizures, we started, like I said, we saw the behavioral side, and then we also started to see some of these things on his skin, which we now know are called angiofibromas, that at the time dermatologists, et cetera, could not identify or figure out. So it was this slow peeling back the onion of like, what could this be? What is it? We now have seizures. We now have this potential skin condition. Like, what is actually going on? And so for the last 3 or so years, we've been doing all kinds of scans, MRIs, CT, EKG, all the things, EEGs in the brain, trying to really understand what's going on. And over time, and finally last year, we definitively came to the diagnosis of Tuberous Sclerosis Complex. And that is a very rare genetic disorder that affects major organs in the body. Diagnosis typically shows up as tumors in these different body systems. So tumors in the brain, tumors on the kidneys, on the heart, typically on the skin, on the eyes, sometimes in the lungs. And so through meeting with different specialists and doing all these scans, that's how we finally put the pieces together. And so he has, a variety of different things that come with this diagnosis. Epilepsy has been something we've clearly started to confirm over time because we still don't have seizure control. Ever since that 8th birthday seizure, that vivid day, we have not had seizure control since. He's now 11. So we're still working through what do we need to do to support him from seizure standpoint. And then from a behavior side, emotional health side, things like that, we finally moved into an official autism diagnosis last year. But even that was inconclusive. And a lot of inconclusive along the way, right? So in a lot of ways, in the past year and a half, our family has felt a little bit better because we have more clarity, but it's also been a lot of working through trauma, working through things we maybe missed along the way somehow. I've had to wrestle a lot as a mom with, where did I go wrong with not necessarily getting to this place sooner for him and for our family. But I also have realized that there's a lot of grace in this journey. And, you kind of have to get to this place of realizing that you're doing the best you can. And you're also learning along the way as you're going through it too. So that's really, in a nutshell, our journey and kind of where we are today.
Yeah. Wow. There's so many follow-up questions I have. And thank you for highlighting the part where your mom mind goes to the, what did I miss?
Yeah.
Where did I go wrong? Basically, what could I have done to change this? And I think it's, of course, as moms, we want that answer. How can we have prevented our child from having to suffer?
Yep.
And I think we, probably you've concluded is we probably couldn't have prevented that. And it doesn't necessarily stop us from asking the question though. And that you are able to see that grace upon grace is what is really necessary as part of our recovery and essentially restoration journey from all the different, what I'll call blows along the way of this mothering journey you've had so far. If you go back to between his 2-year-old and 8-year-old phase when you didn't necessarily know something like a genetic diagnosis was happening, but you saw some behavioral stuff. What do you remember was going on in your mind as you had these little things popping up, but nothing conclusive?
Yeah, nothing conclusive. I always knew that there was a uniqueness to Brendan for sure. But I had a hard time really pinpointing what it was or explaining what it was because of the different interventions we were going through, the doctors and practitioners we were working with. A lot of our conversations with them were, these are maybe his deficits or these are the ways that he's unique. But he's also learning these skills and building these skills and adapting to XYZ that we're trying to teach him. So that was always an interesting dynamic we were trying to kind of uncover was we're going through these interventions, we're uncovering potential deficits, but then he's able to make progress and improve. And so that was always kind of the back and forth conversation we were trying to have with everyone, right? From school to counselors to our pediatrician, everyone. And so with that, kind of ebb and flow with these are the deficits, but he's making progress, we had a hard time really identifying what it was that made him so unique. right?
Mm-hmm.
And, we did a lot of variety of testing. We didn't really go into more of the autistic specific testing until the last 2 years, but we did do an early intervention kind of assessment on ADHD, autism, some of those brain differences around kindergarten. And again, it was more inconclusive. He didn't meet all the criteria. And so he was able to learn certain skills. And so I kind of just rolled with it, right? And there are some times when I think through like certain situations that happened that I wish I maybe would have dug a little bit deeper sooner, or I would have figured out a way to like find a different place to connect to, or get more research and information on, or advocate through, or whatever you want to call it. Because it did feel very uncertain, but I kind of had this headspace of, well, a lot of the people we're connecting with are saying that he's learning these skills. So maybe it's just something he's going to grow out of, or maybe it's something that he's going to grow into. And, we stayed in that headspace for a little while. And then, as he's grown older and more has come up, the path has become much more clear on where we need to continue to support him. But there were definitely seasons where I felt like, I just don't even know exactly how to make sense of this. And I took the guidance of a lot of the practitioners we were working with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like this, it seems like there's like this push and pull that you had where it's like, okay, like challenge here, but it's, the support we're giving him is supporting him, as in it's kind of closing the gap. So I can imagine it was very hard to find your footing in terms of, okay, like, are we like going to have some disabilities that are long-term, or are we not? The disorientation that must have created for you as a mom, as you're supporting this child.
Yeah.
And then you got a conclusive diagnosis.
Yes.
So what was that like after kind of being in this dance of this like hope and hard dance for like so long, and then finally getting something that was very conclusive? What was that like for you?
It was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It was heartbreaking. I think, I have moments where I really think hard about the reality of our family life. And to be transparent, I know for a fact when I was dreaming up our large family as a young adult that I did not dream of having a child who needed extra support and had special needs and did suffer in certain ways. Like that wasn't a part of my dream, right? That wasn't what I really prayed for, if I'm transparent. And so it was this heartbreak of, okay, wow, he really is different and unique. And it's really this deep realization of, I need to let go of a lot of what I thought everything was going to be, even though no matter what, life never goes to plan. Mm-hmm. But it was like this extra layer, like this whole other level that's sometimes hard to even put into words, of how I really had to let go of all of the things I dreamed up and all the expectations I had for our family, and how I really, thought my kids' lives would go. And, I had to really get into this deep-rooted, heartbreaking place in order to kind of build myself back up and really embrace exactly who we are as a family, exactly who my son is, exactly what he needs, and continue to be the best we can through that, and learn through that to the best of our ability. And, that's the only way I can describe it initially. Like once we really had the definitive diagnosis, once we learned like, yes, epilepsy is also a part of this puzzle. Autism is also a part of this puzzle. He's likely going to have larger mood disorders as a part of this puzzle, because this genetic disorder is complex in the sense of there's always things that come alongside it, right? And so I've had to really get into this vulnerable place of embracing that this is how God has created our family and our son, and it's for a reason. And slowly over time, I just need to keep leaning into exactly what that reason is by, following the path he has for us. But yeah, it was definitely hard in the beginning, and still feels hard in certain moments as he grows older and we see, differences he still experiences, deficits he still experiences, and just understanding that that's going to be a part of our life. And we have to learn how to navigate that.
Yeah. For whatever reason, what comes to my mind as you share the experience is almost like a cancer diagnosis, where it's like you get this diagnosis that you have to go through really hard things, and then there's no guarantee of a life happily ever after.
Right.
When you got this diagnosis, it's like you knew instantly that your son, and by default your family, was going to have to go through more hard things.
Yep.
And that is a lot to hold. It's a lot to hold.
It is a lot to hold. And I've had to do a lot of internal work personally as a mom, in therapy, in my own wellness. And I've had to really give myself permission to get into that place of saying, you know what, this is a lot and this is not typical. And what we carry is unique. That doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that it's different. And we have to give ourselves permission to normalize the heaviness of it all. Because if we don't, and my husband and I kind of experienced this, if we don't, like it almost feels more complicated and more confusing and harder because we're not really giving ourselves permission to fully step into exactly how we feel and voicing exactly what we are experiencing. It's almost like we've downplayed exactly how our family dynamic goes and the things that my son is actually managing in his day-to-day life. And, you know, the more you get into that place of saying, you know what, this is a lot and this is hard. It kind of gives you that space to just, you know, accept it even more.
Yeah. This reminds me of a conversation actually I had over on Instagram with a mom who asked a question. It was thought-provoking, I guess. Yeah. And she said, did you ever have a time of looking at your kid as a burden over a blessing? And so she and I went back and forth a little bit. And the bottom line is, that is the experience she's having. Yeah. And she's like, and I feel beyond horrible.
Yeah.
But I wanted to bring this up in particular because of what you shared, where you had to do some deep work.
Yeah.
And are continuing to do that work. But it is, in what you said, giving yourself permission to go to the places and to be in the places that sometimes our minds bring us as we're trying to cope with this like uncharted journey that we did not want to go on.
Yeah.
And if we're honest, we still don't want to go on.
Right.
If we could take it from our children, we would.
Totally.
So it's like we're in this and we don't want to be, and yet we are. And so I loved that this mom firstly reached out because I'm like, I told her, I said, I really want to acknowledge you for like putting voice to what you're experiencing and not let it lurk in the silent shadows. Because that's when things get real dark and heavy.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to bring up here today, because I think having conversations like this, you and I, but then obviously, you know, the listeners of the show, I think it's so important to give space to validate the actual experience that we're having. So thanks for sharing part of your journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
What else for you has helped along the way? So kind of if we look at how you manage your mental health and the emotional weight that comes from all of this, what has worked for you?
Well, kind of calling it back to what you just asked, like that burden versus blessing kind of mindset we play as moms, especially in this kind of experience. The thing that's been the most profound for me has been getting into really specific therapeutic settings where I can really speak honestly about the mixed bag of emotions that I'm feeling. And, you know, I studied psych, I studied social work. I've always been obsessed with the brain and how our brains function. And I think one of the things that we do that is really a massive disservice to ourselves as humans, but especially as moms, is we don't let ourselves really go to those places of voicing those harder feelings and remembering that it's absolutely normal, okay, part of the human experience to feel really joyful, but also really heavy, hard stuff at the exact same time. Like having feelings coexist is part of being human. And when you can get to this place of really normalizing and voicing exactly what you're feeling, it just takes the power away from it feeling quite so heavy inside your body. And so getting into strategic and specific therapeutic settings has been really big for me, especially as I've continued to unpack my son's diagnosis and just our family dynamic, because I have had over and over these coexisting feelings. And to your point, like your conversation with this mom online, it can make us feel so bad. Like we internalize it to the next level and start to beat ourselves up for having these very real, raw, honest feelings. And we have to remember there's nothing wrong with them. They're very real because that's part of being a human, like I said. And so therapy has been massive for me. That's a huge part of my wellness journey. And, you know, I'm a huge advocate for mental health. And so, you know, I talk about therapy, I talk about community groups, I talk about finding a way to get connected to a life coach or a health coach or somebody that can help you externalize everything that you are carrying internally. Because when we carry it around, it just becomes 10 times heavier. And so it's really having that outlet to do that. That has been massive for me. And then, I'm a huge believer in holistic health overall. So I'm always working on moving my body every day, getting sunlight right in the morning and getting outside, trying to fuel with nutrition focused foods that I know are going to fuel my body for energy and keep my brain clear and give me the resilience that I need in order to continue to show up for my life, right? I'm always, trying to work through stress management and making sure that I'm, getting into stillness and trying to practice journaling and meditation and getting out of the noise, whatever that may look like, right? And then, I'm always trying to make sure I'm protecting my sleep as much as possible, which in this season right now is a little hard for us because my son is still having seizures and he typically has seizures while he sleeps at night. So that's always an interesting one for me. But I think, for moms, especially moms of special needs or parents of special needs kids, like there's always going to be an ebb and flow somewhere in our personal wellness, right? Some things are going to feel harder than others, right? During different seasons. And so I'm a big believer in figuring out what are the small things that you can do and that you can focus on that are really going to continue to serve your cup based on where you're at right now. And so I've had seasons where I haven't been able to move my body as much, but I am trying to focus more on like at least a little bit of stillness during the day and trying to get quality foods. Or there's seasons where we're traveling all the time and I'm not focused as much on quality foods. And instead I'm trying to get outside more often or finding ways to laugh and instill joy in my day more, right? So it's like ebbing and flowing and finding that holistic picture, but then addressing like, what are the small things that feel realistic right now? Like that has been the most profound for me because I've had moments and seasons in my life where I tried to do it all the time. And I think that's been a pretty big lesson for me, especially as my kids grow older, is that's not realistic. And so what can we do and how can we focus on celebrating those things?
Oh, so good. I'm laughing because I'm like, oh gosh, like as much as like, intellectually in your head that trying to do it all doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then you like get overwhelmed and then you quit and you don't do any of it.
Yeah.
I still find myself trying to do it. I'm sure you do.
Totally. I mean, let's not be fooled. Let's not be fooled. Yeah.
It's just so funny. Our nature. I don't know. It's just.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. I want to like repeat all that because it was like so good, but I don't need to repeat it. You said it so well. And if y'all want to go like listen to like the last minute again, go do it because it was so well put. And what I really want to emphasize and highlight and what I heard you say and how actually specifically how I heard you say it was really so much more about being in the practice of caring for yourself.
Yep.
Versus being rigid and routine about whatever the thing is that might be part of your health.
100%.
But for you, it's like you're like almost like asking yourself over and over again, what's the thing that is accessible and attainable that contributes to my well-being right now? I actually would love for you to speak on the sleep thing because you're not alone. And moms that have very disrupted sleep because, of course, they're doing what they need to do to keep their child alive.
Yep.
And so knowing how important sleep is for health, right? Give me a little bit of your mindset and maybe even some of your actual strategy on how you partner with your husband on this. Like, what does that look like for you guys?
It's such a great question. And, to be honest, it's pretty imperfect. And, we're also at this point where our son is getting older and he doesn't necessarily want to be sleeping with either of us. And that's kind of what we've been doing for the past 2 years or so since we kind of uncovered more of his seizure activity. And so we're kind of battling that, right? And trying to figure out like he's getting older. He wants to be in his room. He wants his privacy, stuff like that. But as far as how I partner with my husband, we typically flip off every other night, right? So one of us is sleeping with our son and the other one is getting quality sleep in our bed. And that's one way where we know like we're at least getting quality sleep every other night or every few nights, depending on kind of what his schedule is. If he's traveling, sometimes we'll flip it up. But that's kind of what we do to kind of guarantee at least a little bit of quality sleep. When I know that I'm sleeping with him, I try to kind of focus on other things that I know also promote really quality sleep, right? So I'm not like consuming all the things online right before I go to bed, right? Like I'm trying to unplug. I'm trying to be outside a little bit more to really help nurture my nervous system with intention, right? I'm trying to utilize quality supplementation that I know also promotes calm and sleep, right? So I'm a huge believer in like L-theanine and magnesium, getting like a cherry tart juice and stuff like that before you go to bed at night. Like really trying to lean on supplementation that can also induce calm. Because even when I'm not getting quality sleep or I'm getting fragmented sleep, like if I'm trying to do certain habits throughout the day that keep my nervous system kind of nurtured, even fragmented sleep, I don't feel it quite as hard because I've tried to really lean on those habits more during the day that I know can help me just feel a little bit more rested, even when sleep is crazy. So that's really what I try to do. But like I said, it's totally imperfect. Some days are great and some sleep nights are not as terrible as others. And some are really fragmented. Some are really hard. And it's just kind of like, rolling with it the best you can and trying to kind of find that balance of how can you at least instill some level of quality sleep by, working with your partner, et cetera, to kind of figure out how you guys can ebb and flow your effort.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for the window into kind of how you guys do it. I think
Yeah.
everyone's going to have such value in kind of what they figured out, like what works for them. So thank you for sharing that. And whether it's sleep someone's struggling with or something else, I feel like also the way that you're approaching it is like, okay, like sometimes you can't have the thing like sleep. You can still have all these other, it's almost like I picture them as like lily pads of like a foundation.
Yeah.
To give you that stable footing that we need as human beings.
Absolutely.
I want to actually turn a little bit to your wisdom as a health coach and your experience as a health coach. I would be interested. And so you and I both very much align on standing for women taking care of themselves. And you and I probably both see them getting stuck in a variety of places. I would love to hear from your experience where you notice moms most often getting stuck. And then we'll also look at kind of options to get unstuck. So let's start with where you see people, moms, specifically moms, getting stuck.
So you kind of just touched on this, which is the all or nothing mindset. And in a lot of the conversations I have with women who are busy, who have special needs in their family, who are working in and out of the home, who they don't know how to get beyond the all or nothing mindset. And you just touched on it, Kara, where it's like, if I can't do this, then I can't do anything. And I think a lot of that is a product of the society we live in and the wellness industry specifically when it comes to women's health, because so much of what's shown to us or taught to us as far as what's healthy are these one size fits all, cookie cutter, fast track, here's what you need mentalities. And there's not enough messaging around, but what are you doing for your bio-individual health that serves your longevity and that really fits your life, right? Like your season, your life, and what feels manageable. And this is what I coach women through, because so often that's what keeps them stuck. They feel like if they can't do all the things on the list, then there's no way to even start the process. There's no way to even take those baby steps. And so what we do a lot in the work that I'm coaching through is like peeling back that onion, like a lot of things that I talk about, right? And figuring out what are the simplest things we can start with. Like what feels manageable in your life and what are the simplest things we can start with. And then we build from there. And so it's not a cookie cutter strategy. It's not like a program or a system that you take and have to figure out how to put into your life. We do it in the opposite way. We figure out what's going on in your life, and then we adopt something into that you can actually execute on. And so I would say that's mostly what I see, because we're our own worst critic. And we feel like if we can't do everything as it says by the book, then we can't do any of it. And that's just not the reality. There are so many ways we can do baby step things that over time and with consistency will lead to all kinds of tremendous change.
Why do you think we or women are so resistant to those small or baby steps?
I feel like we make up that they're not going to be profound enough to actually create change. I don't know about you, but I grew up with a lot of messaging around just work harder, just do more, just eat less, just try harder, just be more disciplined, just go. And so a lot of this is like working out of that programming and doing a lot of unlearning and realizing for our longevity health, and especially when we get into midlife health seasons and we have all kinds of added stress because our lives are different, et cetera, like we have to be doing things totally different from a health standpoint. And a lot of that is like embracing that less is more. and like getting into that place of understanding, like, it really doesn't have to be an all or nothing. And so I know even in my life, when I think back, I used to think, well, these small steps aren't going to be worth it because they're not going to move the needle at all. Or even being able to do 1 or 2 things versus the whole list of 10 things I'm quote unquote supposed to do isn't going to be enough. And again, it's that work harder mentality that we've all been shown in some way that we have to start to release, because it's just not really what serves us best now, but especially for our long-term health. And so I think that's a big one.
And it is so funny because, right? Like, so we can't do it perfectly. So we do nothing.
Yep.
And we know nothing's not helpful.
Yeah, totally.
Right. And it's actually, I feel like if we can with humor and with compassion and look at kind of the patterns that we have, we can be like, that is actually quite funny. That is how we're doing this. And then we can maybe embrace those small things. Yeah. I want to mention a book that I wonder if you've heard of. It's actually, it's been a while since I've read it, but it's called The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy.
Yep.
You know that book?
Oh
my gosh. That book is so good.
It's so good.
Because it talks about like the things that stick in my mind. Like he talked about, essentially, it's exactly what it is. It's a compound effect. It's doing little things over a long period of time and the compounding effects that they have. And I always remember how he's like, if you basically don't put mayonnaise on your sandwich over however long, I don't remember what it was, but like the effect of it, I was like, dang it. So every time I put mayonnaise on my sandwich, you want to know it? I'm thinking of Darren or Daryl, whatever his name is. And I'm like, I just love mayonnaise. So that's not going to work for me. But for reals, I think it's super great to have like all of the actual data that he had to help really break down the belief of this, or like the stronghold that all or nothing has on us, and really allow us to celebrate these small, almost imperceivable shifts. And that's why I'm thinking back to a functional doctor that I had on who's all about women's health that was like talking about stress management. And he's like, the impact that taking 3 deep, slow breaths a day can have is actually profound.
Yes.
Like that actually makes a difference. And actually hearing that from him, I was like, okay, that's good to know. Cause I thought it had to be much bigger. I had to do like a 10-minute meditation or I don't know, something bigger. And to really recognize that these small things are very, very effective. That was really, really helpful.
Yes.
Okay. What's popping in my mind is the impact of community on this part of our health. How do you, like, in your own life, use communities to support yourself, like with your holistic health? And actually, how do you advise or guide or support your clients in this area?
I've started most of my coaching effort online, so I do a lot virtually. And I've met a lot of amazing practitioners and other coaches, other women who are like-minded, who are, you know, kind of working towards the same things, have similar backgrounds, similar interests, stuff like that. And I've done a lot online. But I will say over time, especially in the last handful of years, as we've become more deep-rooted in our local community, as we've learned more about our son, you know, I really have worked hard to try to continue to figure out how do I cultivate in-person relationships. And, you know, my life, I've always been a people pleaser to a fault, to the point where I felt like I needed to be liked and loved by everybody and be everybody's friend and constantly be pouring into everyone around me at all times. And as I've grown older, but especially as I've grown further into our family dynamic and with our son, I've really learned the value of really deep-rooted friendships, like a handful of friendships, and how much that can make a really big difference in how we feel. And so when I think of community, I really think about quality. And I really think about, you know, the importance of having people around you that share your values, that also want to find ways to prioritize health for themselves and their families, who believe in, you know, being transparent about talking about our experiences and what's really going on in our lives. And that's what I have really worked to cultivate with my husband and I over the past handful of years. And it has made a big difference in how I feel mentally and emotionally. And when I think about like my personal holistic health journey, like I've had seasons where I haven't had quality, deep-rooted friendships, and that's made a really big difference. And so I know, like, as I've uncovered more of our son's diagnosis, like starting to connect with moms who are also walking a similar path. and again, kind of have that health component as a part of their journey too. Like those have been the most powerful and profound for me. And I want to encourage other women to kind of get into that space of cultivating that and building that in your life, because relational health is a huge part of our mental and emotional well-being. And we are not meant to life alone. We are not meant to manage all of that we feel on our own. And so when we have people in our corner and a community that we can lean on to learn about ourselves, to learn about our kids, about our families, and so much more, it makes such a big difference in how we feel. And so that's, when I think about community, that's really what I've worked on and continue to work on, honestly, every day, because it's something that takes some level of diligence and time, and you do have to put effort into it, just like everything else. But I've learned how much it matters for my overall health.
Yeah, and it brings me back to this mom who reached out on Instagram, that she felt safe enough in the relationship to come forward with how she was actually feeling.
Yeah.
And so back to what you were saying, is this the quality of these relationships that you feel like you have the space to explore and sort out some of these, what I guess I'll call kinks.
Yeah.
And how things are going up there for us.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually even a good refresher for me, for you to say, like, it takes investment, it takes effort, it takes intentionality.
Yeah.
And actually it's kind of fun for me to see, because I look back into how we met and I see the effort and I see the intentionality. And that is why we're talking today, is because of the authentic approach that you had in reaching out to create relationships. So well done, you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you reaching out. You did all the work. I'm just the lucky recipient. Okay. Super, super great. Anything else that you would add to different avenues that you might take to help a mom get unstuck, or kind of to move from that all or nothing, or just kind of getting over those stumbling blocks that so often stop us?
Yeah, I really believe in the power of therapy, if I'm honest. I think if I was going to give a mom who felt a little isolated, a little stuck, a little like unsure how to make that next step, I would probably point them to therapeutic support. And the reason is when you are feeling that stuck, you need an objective opinion. And it can't necessarily be somebody who really knows you well in your life, because sometimes you can't unpack it quite the same. And so I've learned the power of objective opinions, like people that don't necessarily know you on a personal level, who can really give you feedback based on what you're experiencing and sharing in a totally different view and through a totally different lens. And that can help you see things that you don't see about yourself, about your situation, about what you're even experiencing. And I know for me, like I've had to have people help me understand what I was saying and what I was doing and what I was telling myself wasn't really aligning with reality. And I had to have people help me unpack those pieces and help me understand like that I was so much more deserving of what I was painting as far as the picture in my life. And that was really transformative for me. And so it's always like this mental and emotional component for me. Like I always lead women back there. And I've had women that have come to me and have asked like, can we work together? I feel like I need a health coach. And we've kind of unpacked their story, their journey. We've talked about where they're at and talked about what they're experiencing. And I've said to them, I really want you to start with diving deeper into more therapeutic services, or something that's going to help you dive a little bit more into the mental and emotional component, because that's going to help you set up more of the foundation to help you actually take the steps forward. And I think for women, like we get into this place of believing we don't deserve the support, that asking for help is a weakness, that somehow like if we can't do it all, that we're falling short or that we're not enough. And I just want to be a voice that says like none of that is true. That's all a story that we've all made up in our mind at some point in time for some reason. And so if you are feeling really stuck, like oftentimes it's getting to a place where you can unpack those soundtracks and those narratives that do not serve you and that you really don't deserve. And then once you start to kind of get that into a place that feels a little bit more manageable, then you can start to take these other steps towards creating more health outcomes, et cetera, leaning on different regimens, routines, and things like that.
I think there's so much wisdom there. what's interesting is, I'm a life coach, obviously, and I look at the industry and it's, there's a wide variety of types of life coaches, training, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like, and I bet you see this all the time in the health coaching space as well, where it's like people start with trying to change the actions that you're taking, the things you're doing or not doing, like just go work out or whatever the thing is, right?
Yes.
And it fails 100% of the time.
Yep.
If we don't change the being behind that doing, or otherwise said, if we don't do that deeper work that has been driving the behavior or lack of behavior.
Right.
And so I think that's what I think if I look back over like going from like a baby early life coach to who I am now, I think it's like you cannot underestimate the wholeness of the human body, mind, spirit, soul, and that you can't just start at the surface. Like that's not going to be effective. And it's actually going to drive your client crazy because they're going to think something's wrong with them because they are not doing it.
Right.
And then they're going to go back into shame and all that stuff. And that's not what we want. So a lot of wisdom there. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for the conversation today. I thoroughly enjoyed this. How can people reach out if they want to connect with you individually or professionally?
I'm most active on Instagram. I'm at Erin K. Trier on Instagram. That's where I spend most of my time. I share a lot of my coaching work. I talk a lot about our life, my son, our family, and I would love to connect with anyone who wants to just, talk more, talk about your story, your journey, talk about health, talk about diagnoses. I'm an open book always, and that's the best place to find me. I also have a website, erintrier.com, where I share more about my work. I have some freebies and things on there alongside my podcast, which is called Empowered in Health. So those are kind of the three best places to find me.
Such good places. And man, I got to say, you are very eloquent in how you deliver all that. I was like, I got to practice my little spiel. That is great. So yes, go. All of those links to be able to easily find and connect with Erin will be on the show notes. So you can just click on over and connect with her and kind of follow whatever leading you have as you listen to her story and how it might align with yours. And so thank you so much. With that, we'll see you all on the next episode.